I'm an atheist, but I love talking about God. And throughout my days here at university, I see Crew, for example, a Christian organization, as well as various street preachers roaming about, and I decide that it might be fun to talk to them, just to see what's going on. And throughout my recent interactions with these Christians, one common question that I get asked is simply, why are you an atheist? Now, although my answer is never this coherent or concise, this is what I'd like to have said. Simply put, the tri-omni Abrahamic God concept is untenable to me. It's not something that my conscience or my intellect can assent to. Now, what is this tri-omni Abrahamic God? Well, in the Abrahamic religious traditions, that being Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, there's a notion of God as being all of three attributes: all loving, all powerful, and all knowing. All of these come together to create what is seen as the most maximally great God. But I think that there are a number of problems that come to how one has to look at the world in order to maintain this God concept that simply leads me to abandon the concept. For instance, one must say that this is the best possible world, that God essentially couldn't do any better. If he could do better, after all, he's either not powerful enough to make it happen, or not loving enough to care to make it happen. One must assume, rather problematically, that this is God's best, but somehow still claim that he's omnipotent. It's just that omnipotent means able to do all that is possible, and this actual world is the greatest of all possible worlds, even if it would seem that we can imagine a better one with relative ease. As such, the Christian apologist, or simply the average lay Christian, must come up with analytic arguments for why this world is forced by necessity to be what it is, that there could be nothing better because this is as good as it can get. As a result, I've seen various Christian apologists who have to find ways of rationalizing and justifying pediatric cancer, malnutrition, rickets, being predestined to death as an animal in a forest fire in Australia. And I say predestined because, of course, God knows their fate in advance, and as such, they succumb to needless suffering because there's no redemptive capacity, since these animals can't go to heaven. And these animals have no autonomy such that it could be said that they chose something that results in their adversity. The apologist also has to justify something like crippling anxiety. And I simply cannot forsake my conscience, aka my bullshit detector, and entertain these fanciful mental gymnastics simply because my worldview would require I invent ad hoc reasoning to fill a gaping, oozing, vicious gap that is gratuitous suffering. It is to make light out of, to redeem something that isn't meant to have redemptive value, flattening the world into a mezzo-level wafer whose taste can be tolerated by us humans. To me, this tri-omni Abrahamic God concept is a puny God image that reeks of humanity. It bears all of our faults, which Ludwig Feuerbach has expertly stated in his Essence of Christianity, that this is what we create religion for. To deify and absolutize the things that we love the most about ourselves to try to escape those which we hate the most. Nietzsche has also pointed this out. This God concept has all of the same faults that humans seek to escape, such as the limitations of our power and our autonomy, our ways of thinking, our rigid moralism, being intolerant of those who are too different from us and thus are part of the outgroup. And at the end of the day, dispositionally, I am simply averse to belief. In William James's famous essay, The Will to Believe, He seeks, quote, a defense of our right to adopt a believing attitude in religious matters in spite of the fact that our merely logical intellect may not have been coerced. And he says that the ground for having a justified belief is it living, is it forced, and is it momentous? These criteria go into whether or not a belief is justified or warranted. Now, the first of these is the most important and the most relevant to what I say about simply being dispositionally averse to belief. James puts it plainly that a living option is one in which both hypotheses are live ones. Trained as you are, each hypothesis makes some appeal, however small, to your belief. In other words, if I have two sides of a debate to choose between, both of these could be realistically accepted. I have the knowledge framework in place to understand the terms upon which this is being debated, and I could possibly choose either one of these. Giving arguments, for example, being an agnostic or a Christian is the example that James uses. Now next, there's also whether something is forced or not. Now this is to say that there is no possibility of not choosing. That either way, you must choose something. And third, that is momentous. That is to say that it is unique and significant and is a difference which makes a difference, as James puts it. This is the criteria for warranted belief. And the most important one, as I've said, is the idea of live versus dead belief. Whether or not it makes some appeal to my conscience and to my intellect that can be reasonably arbitrated about. And God, as it's seen in the Abrahamic religions, is simply not a live belief. It presents itself as so far-fetched, so marred with humanity and its problems, that I simply can't assent to it. I think that we should accept that belief is not simply about truth, but as William James saw it too, it's also about our individual values and the way that they whittle down the world, dictating what is possible to be believed. And that being possible to be believed is not simply about the facts, but about what sorts of things we find warranted and if and when we feel content with what evidence. Now, in seeking to nuance my understanding of religiosity and the divine, I've come upon a few of my favorite quote-unquote spiritual thinkers whose conception of the divine I think is much more helpful for getting at the point of this lecture, which is moving beyond the tri-omni Abrahamic God concept, but still leaving room for religious tolerance. First, we have James Joyce. For Joyce, the divine is something in the everyday, in the splendor of sound and in living. For Friedrich Nietzsche, the divine is in creativity, in action, and the freedom of the individual to face uncertainty without the promise, indeed the crutch, of the absolute. It's a will to shout into the wind and be content. For Gerard Manley Hopkins, a famous Jesuit poet, the divine is in nature, and the biblical messages seamlessly being impressed on the world like a stamp for our enjoyment and indeed for living. For Walt Whitman, the divine is in the spirit of conviviality between people, the inherent equality of humans and the value in simply existing and preaching what one is, the shameless presence of the world with no need for moralization or judgment. For Henry Miller, the divine is in orgasmic statements of fact about life and our struggles to birth something worth living for. His writing is teeming with the pregnancy of every moment to yield some kind of revelation, famously occurring in his Tropic of Cancer when gazing at an open asshole. I think that the only thing God could tenably mean to me is something so divorced from the Abrahamic God concept that it's hard to accurately and adequately state why I don't believe in this kind of God, and if I could believe in one, what it would mean. But I think it would entail something about being radical, being concerned with liberty, respecting difference among humans, and yet virtually indifferent to humanity and its cosmic banality. It would be different to different people, and it would be something negotiable, something moving and dynamic and capable of change. As such, I think that we need a libertarian conception of religious belief. In William James's Philosophical Conceptions and Practical Results, he seeks to re-examine the actual ground for religious belief, moving it away from some sort of propositional logic approach where we're looking for some static truth, and instead wants to reorient religious belief around religious experience. He says that what keeps religion going is something else than abstract definitions and systems of logically concatenated adjectives, and something different from faculties of theology and their professors. All these things are after effects, secondary accretions upon a mass of concrete religious experiences, connecting themselves with feeling and conduct that renew themselves in secula seculorum in the lives of humble, private men. He says that these direct experiences of a wider spiritual life are the primary mass for direct religious belief. The word God, he said, means just those passive and active experiences of your life, and that they are certainly the originals of the God idea, and theology, the translation. In other words, if God could mean anything, it must be something lived, in the same manner as which he speaks of live belief. It must be something that one has encountered personally. He says that the God of systematic theology should exist or not exist is a matter of small practical moment. At most, it means that you may continue uttering certain abstract words, and that you may stop using others. But if the God of these particular experiences be false, it is an awful thing for you if you are one of those whose lives are stayed on such experiences. In other words, for some people, God really matters, and when we say that it matters, we're not talking about abstract definitions. Instead, we're talking about something practical and lived and gained through that practical experience with reality, the likes of which Joyce, Nietzsche, Hopkins, Whitman, and Miller would all be privy to. I think that a libertarian standard for acceptable religious belief helps to thrive on diversity, to retain the possible openness towards any encounter with God. For example, William Burroughs writes in his essay, My Own Business, "Yes, this world would be a pretty easy and pleasant place to live in if everybody could just mind his own business and let others do the same. Most of the trouble in the world has been caused by folks who can't mind their own business because they have no business of their own to mind, any more than a smallpox virus has. Victimless crime, the assumption that what a citizen does in the privacy of his own dwelling is nonetheless someone else's business and therefore subject to denunciation and punishment, is the very lifeline of this virus. But if the right to mind one's own business is recognized, the whole shit position is untenable, and hell hath no more vociferous fury than an endangered parasites." And Burroughs, of course, embellishes this position quite a bit with his characteristic humor. But the point is that we should be okay with minding our own business, of shrinking our concept of truth and understanding its mobility, its dynamism. And I think that the limit of this libertarian conception of religious belief, and indeed of atheism, hence the title of this lecture, is something that we can take from libertarian political theory. In libertarian political theory, the ground for ethics is liberty, the ability to exercise one's freedom in one's daily life, but with limits. If, for example, I desire to freely murder whomever I desire to murder, that is not something that would be legally protected in a libertarian political order, because that would undermine the freedom of others. As such, One should not tolerate those religious beliefs or behaviors which themselves fundamentally undermine the tolerance heuristic. This could be religious wars, forcible conversion, institutional overreach, coercion of non-adherence. The conception of religious belief that I seek to argue for here is not an all-tolerant, but rather a maximally tolerant society. It is tolerance within reason, or tolerance, terms and conditions apply. That being said, that's it for this lecture. I hope it's provided something of substance that you can think about. Feel free to leave any comments or criticism below. Check out any of my other lectures I've done on postmodernism, German idealism, gender theory, post-colonial studies, and other classic literature. You can become a channel member for $5 a month if you'd like to gain access to a monthly private philosophy Zoom, which you can tailor to your needs. I also have super thanks if you'd just like to donate to the channel, because I appreciate everything that anyone gives, and it helps this channel go a long way. That's it for this lecture, and I'll see you in another one.